How is everybody doing? Welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. And today I have got a very special guest for you. Today I'm joined by an athletic performance specialist with degrees in sports nutrition, sports science, sports psychology, as well as over 20 years experience working with combat athletes. Today I'm joined by the one and only Tony Ricci. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Stephen. Nice to be with you, my friend, and chat about the things that we love, right?
Yeah, thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. How are you? What's been happening in your world recently?
Well, as with everyone, Stephen, we made adjustments due to COVID, right? So certainly we haven't had any local fights. New York hasn't permitted that. And most of our athletes out of the Serra-Longo team have had to leave state. They're fighting in Florida or Texas. Of course, other than those who are currently in the UFC, they're out the Apex. Like Aljamain will be fighting for the title against Peter Yan, right? And so those guys are out there. So, with everything out here, Stephen, we've had to make adjustments. I have a lot of wrestlers, and they've been off the mats for a while. But things are starting to come back with the vaccine. And New York State is allowing small capacity in venues now. So in the fight sport world, anyway, things are coming back a little bit. Even in boxing, everything has been pushed out either to Vegas or fights in Florida. So we've really had to, as you guys have to, of course, had to navigate through all of this and get as much training and conditioning in as we can and skill work. But at the same time, work around the limitations. So it's picking up here. Things are looking better.
Oh, cool. And how how sort of your getting in the gym and actually working with athletes going? Is that getting obviously you said it's getting a little bit more back to normal, but was there a point where you weren't in the gym with athletes just to do restrictions?
Definitely. We started shutting down in New York State here about just a little under a year ago. So I would say, Stephen, it was really dead for everyone from about mid-March, April of 2020 to July, August.
Right.
We really didn't start moving a little bit again until about September. And what was really neat is most of the team, was smart because they quarantined, but Ally Quinta has his own training gym. Yeah. And a lot of the guys were going there. So that worked wonderfully. They have a good mat space and some bags. So the kids stayed on top of it, but certainly they were well separated, like from Matt, Sarah, and Ray Longo and all the other skill coaches they work with for about a solid 5 months.
Right. Okay. Oh, it'll be good that things are getting a little bit back to normal. I know we had the announcement a couple of days ago that gyms can start reopening and we can start making a little bit of progress, which is good to see. So before we start diving into some of the topics that I had in mind, obviously I did a little bit of an introduction there, but for anyone who might not know your background, how you got involved in combat sports and coaching, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself.
Sure. So I grew up, I'm kind of an old man in this game now, and I grew up in a wonderful era of boxing. So my dad was born in Italy. My mom was born in the country of Italy, but dad came here and, grew up around Jake LaMotta, old time names, Rocky Graziano, right? New Marciano. And he grew up around boxing, got to watch Sugar Ray Robinson. So I was a big boxing fan as a young boy, and I grew up. Ali was kind of at the end of his career when I can remember, right? So I'm not old enough to even remember Muhammad's peak years, but I caught him at the later stages when you could watch a boxing match on a Friday night fight. Ali for Frazier, get this, Stephen, for free on a Friday night, right? No $75 or $90 or anything. Yeah. And on Saturday fights. But then we had the wonderful middleweight years, Hagler, Hearns, Leonard, Duran. So that's really where I went. My first love for fighting was in that fight boxing. And additionally, when I was a boy, the Olympics were very centered on the traditional sports, boxing, wrestling, weightlifting. So I grew up watching the United States pretty much compete against Russia in wrestling, boxing, and those were the televised sports, whereas now you barely see them. So that's really where my love came into it. And I started doing some jiu-jitsu and judo at a very young age. and fell in love with it then. And as I progressed, I always trained, and I'm a big fan of the physiology of fighting. That's what drove me there.
Yeah.
It's so complicated, right? And so fascinating to think what goes on in a boxing ring or an MMA fight compared to throwing a shot put or running a 100-meter sprint, right? Or rugby, as an example, would be a better, closer to fighting with the complex bioenergetics, needing strength, endurance. So anyway, I'll train all the time, train like a pro fighter, but just wasn't my interest because I was always involved in heavy academics, and stayed with it, love it, and love just trying to help young athletes, really enhance their performance and try to just get an extra step, try to add something that maybe we never considered before that can really help them out,
Yeah. Oh, cool. And how have you found, obviously you mentioned there about the academic side of things, but also the coaching side of things. How have you found them to complement each other in the work that you're doing, trying to balance both of them? Because obviously, from the combat side of things, there is maybe some old school methods of doing things, but tied in with, I think there's a lot more sort of sports science actually getting developed into the combat side of things. So how have you found sort of, balancing that throughout your career, if you like?
Wonderful question. It really is. I think there's a couple of things to look at. First, MMA, I would say, is more on the sports science side because it's newer, right?
Yeah.
And MMA was heavily influenced, of course, by Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and the Gracies wonderfully in the early days. But it was also heavily influenced by American wrestling once they caught on to, all right, if we're going to go to the ground, Mark Schultz is going to come in and all these, great American wrestlers. And the thing about wrestling, though, is it is a little bit more advanced because, these kids come out of Division I programs with great athletic trainers, great strength coaches. They have nutritionists. Cale Sanderson is a coach, so they come out a little bit more advanced than, let's say, and they're a little more open to sports science, even though the training itself is old school in wrestling. But they're a little bit more open to science, let's say, than the traditional European kickboxer or the American boxer or English boxer. They're freelancers. They don't have a college program. They don't have a team around them that, of athletic trainers or strength coaches or nutritionists. But they have good people. But my point to that is, I think those disciplines even have remained more, much more traditional than, let's say, MMA. And now you have CPI doing a wonderful job of advancing the sports science. But I have, on my own level, I have found this, I have the academics behind me and I love them and I study it, of course. But it's real simple. Offer suggestions from the sports science side to the skill coach and see if we could marry that, right?
Yeah.
So I always say I collaborate, I don't dictate. I may have a bunch of information I can share, and I'm very lucky because I've worked with Ray Longo for 6-7 years now, and Ray is the best. He's open to all that, Stephen. Yeah. So, hey, Ray, here's some cool stuff. Here's some cool stuff on creatine, beta-alanine, and Ray will try it himself, by the way, right? Like he's really cool at that. Here's some neat ideas that maybe we can help just for the footwork and propulsion. So, you take what you know and you offer it. And I think that's not only to the skill coach, but to the fighter. Yeah. Here's what I want to do and why. Okay, here's what the research says. And you make it simple. So I think this can really help us in this capacity. So I find that if you're less didactic and very collaborative, it can work really well, marrying academia with traditional coaching. And because a lot of coaches know they're doing things that the sports science would validate, they don't even know they're doing that, right?
Yeah. I think sometimes it's a case of there's a train of thought that they have to fight against each other, whereas sometimes actually, like what you said, they can complement each other and work together. It's not a case of science is going to come in and turn over everything that they're doing, but they can both learn from each other, which I find that interesting. The kind of the building on from that, the first question I kind of wanted to ask is, with the athletes that you're working with, obviously within that environment, you might get them for a couple of sessions, but they're also doing their own skill work, and they're, there's a lot more strings to their bow in terms of, how their sessions and training plan is gonna look like. So how much time do you actually have with the athletes that you work with? And in those sessions, what are you actually looking to get out of those sessions, so that, when it comes to fight day or the performance side of things, that, you've given them the best possible chance of being able to perform on the day?
Yeah. So that's a good way to direct, because we have to frame how we're going to do things. So I think it's almost, if you will, yeah, I could look at it like this: if there's no fight on the schedule, right, then my time will be maybe 4 or 5 hours. It'll be a lot. It'll be 4 or 5 hours a week. Why? Because skill training has declined a little bit, right? They're still working, but the intensity isn't there. The sheer volume may not be there, which in many cases is wonderful, because they're more relaxed about it and they actually can learn very well. So when there's nothing on the calendar, if they're willing, I will have more sessions, maybe 3, 4 a week with them. And in those sessions, it's a couple of things. I tend to, particularly with the young fighters, not block things too much where it's exclusively strength, exclusively stabilization, because you just don't know if they get a fight on last minute notice. Yeah. Right? The up and coming fighters, if you will, you don't want to be in a strength block where the only quality you're working is heavy loading. So I do tend to undulate a lot of my training. There'll be an emphasis in the block. It might be an emphasis in strength endurance, speed strength, max strength. So there'll be an emphasis, but we keep those other qualities in check, just in case something changes. In addition, as the camp progresses, I will get their schedule. Now, there's a lot to consider. Maybe they're weak in a particular discipline because they're transitioning, for example, from boxing or kickboxing to MMA, or vice versa, wrestling to MMA, and they need far more hours and time put into jiu-jitsu or stand-up. So I've got to look at that. We develop the schedule first. I don't make any assumptions till I know their schedule. Particularly, I think the most important thing, Stephen, is staying away from sparring, right? If you're sparring Wednesday and Saturday, then somehow I'm going to try to get in with them maybe on a Monday and a Thursday. Get a day's rest in between, right? And the heavier loading would be contingent upon how far we are from sparring, stuff like that. So what do we look at? Number one, where we are away from a fight. Is there a fight, first of all? If not, greater volume. Number two, develop the schedule, because we have to work around that. As a performance coach, we get excited about what we can do, but I think sometimes we overvalue it. Let me take that back. That's not a good word. We rush to give it, first importance when there's other things that come first. The value is definitely there, but we have to remember there are 6 things that may have to be addressed before us, right? So so you get the schedule, then fit it into the best of your capacity. Then the third thing we look at is, what is the biomotor qualities most needed from that fighter? So a lot of times I hear the same thing: keep it simple, stupid, right? Do your deadlift, do your bench press, and squat and get them strong. And okay, that is good for the young fighter or the young wrestler. I don't disagree with that. But my philosophy has always been this: all fighters need the same qualities, but they don't possess the same qualities equally. So there may be a greater focus on the athlete transitioning from kickboxing to hip thrusts, horizontal, ground, hip explosion, lower extremity power, because they're not used to being tied up. I may use more tactile cueing. I may touch them while they're doing an exercise. Vice versa. I might keep the wrestler on their feet longer. Lateral explosion, more of the boxing style work collaborated with strength protocols. So that's really my philosophy. I have to look at where we are, their schedule, and what are they in need of. In closing on this question, I do also go to the skill coach. What do you want? Right? Because if you go to the skill coach and say, well, I'm going to do A, B, and C, that could be a problem, We got to ask, what do you need? And I'll help you get it.
Yeah, that actually moves quite on nicely to. You must have been reading my notes when I was writing this down. Sort of when you're looking at the, I think that's a good phrase that fighters need the same qualities, but they may not be equal in all of those. How does that discussion go? Obviously, you mentioned at the start that you might end up speaking with the athlete and saying, look, this is what we're going to do. Is that sort of a team side of things, or where do you think the athletes weaknesses are or needs to address, and where does it come from their actual coach, or is it a case of from the coach's point of view, we're going to try this, see how the athlete responds, and then and then speak from there?
Yeah, well, I think I go to the coach first. I watch, so first thing, well, let me take that back. I'll get, it's assessment, it's discussion. Hey, what do you, so I was once asked in a very high level position, and in hindsight, I'm glad I didn't get it, because it's just too hard to keep, and I don't want to work with pro sports teams anyway. Yeah. But anyway, they asked me, what can you do for us? And I said, well, I have to be honest with you, that's the improper question. What do you need from me? I need to know also what you're looking for. Because what I can do may not be relevant. So I could get a guy stronger and the coach may say he's already really strong. That's not the issue. I can't get him to move in and out of range. He's got the footwork of a fire hydrant, right? Yeah. So the first thing is I will sit with an assessment and listen carefully. We call it like a motivational interviewing style. Hey, what are your strong points? Like, where do you feel good? Where are you most comfortable in a fight? Oh, my stand-up is great. I'm a world champ kickboxer. When I'm on my feet, I feel great. When I'm on the ground, I get nervous. I lose, I come up tired. Okay, right? There's a hint that there may be, it's probably a mental issue, not a physical, but they're not highly confident in their skill set on the ground. They tire more on the ground. And then I will just get that feedback and talk with like Ray or a coach about it. There are other coaches I work with at the the pro level where kids are coming up, but mostly Longo, and say, okay, yeah, well, he gets, he seems to be nervous on the ground. So what can I do? I mean, part of my training is going to be not only building their strength and their power and their mobility when they are on the ground, but building their confidence that they are physically competent there. I'm not going to take the skill rein, but I'm going to build. Okay, here, boom, we're doing this hip thrust, bilateral, unilateral. Okay, now this is for this specific movement. This is for when this happens in the fight. So to me, strength and conditioning isn't just training the periphery. It's training the athlete's belief in the periphery. Yeah. I did A, B, and C, therefore I can accomplish D, E, and F. Yeah. Right? So it's listening. It's not making any suggestions till I know where they're very confident. It's watching them in sparring. Watch how they process, put a heart rate monitor on. They're going crazy in the stand-up and their heart rate's 130. They're on the ground and they're mounted and nobody's moving and their heart rate's 180. Well, right away, I know where they want to be and where they don't want to be, right? Yeah. So those are the ways I get that together, Stephen, like a global view of careful listening and assessment, thoughts from the skill coaches, watch a little sparring, right? And then we could, make some decisions as to where we have to go and where we could be of greatest help. That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
I think that's a good way of looking at it, because especially when it comes to performance and it comes to the day of the fight or anything like that, I think confidence has a big role to play in that, and they need to know that what they've done in the build up to that has put them in the best possible position. Just on a little bit of a tangent of that in terms of the program, is there something that from when you've done the assessment and you've watched and you think, okay, this is the most optimal plan that I can put together for this athlete, but in terms of their own confidence and how they feel about training, is there ever a time where you feel as though you need to put an exercise in there just because the athlete has an affiliation to that exercise, that's the exercise that they feel good and they've had maybe success with it in the past, but it isn't really directly related to performance? That kind of makes sense.
That's a really good question, truly. And the answer I would say is, yeah, I think there is, because you know why? That builds confidence globally for them, right? So if they're really good at something, maybe even put it in earlier in the session because they feel good about it. Their mood is lifted, they're elevated, their confidence has been lifted. And you say, great, that was awesome. And I know, let's say it's a stand-up hip. Sometimes I do vertical hip thrust where, I put the bar on the hips and band it horizontally and explode outward. Let's say the guy or the woman is great at that and they love that. Let's get a few sets in because it's not going to hurt. As long as it's not going to really substitute for something they absolutely need or do any harm, I think that's really important, no doubt. Because then I can say, man, you did that beautifully. Now we're going to kick it the same way in another position. Yeah. Or if you did A that well, we're going to do B just as good. Yeah. And you work with him and say, well, oh, wow. The way you did that means there's no way you're not, if somebody's mounting you, you're going to be stuck there with your skill level and the power and the speed and the mobility. No, and you try to start to help build that. Not too much because, again, it's the skill coaches, but you and I are going to work their physical qualities, which in turn does help on the mental. And we want to remind them, like I said, that they're doing this. And because they're doing this, they're going to be capable of more than they were before.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good way to look at it. And like what you say, having it at the start of the session, it builds momentum into the session and builds them a confidence, which is good. Just going on to the exercise side of things. Obviously, you mentioned at the start that you might either get them strong in the traditional exercises such as deadlift and bench and all that sort of stuff. But what are your thoughts on sort of the special strength sort of exercises and how much of a place do they have, depending on how far out from a fight they are, or within the training program in general?
And when you say special, what are you talking about? Accessory, or like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so there's some you've seen some things of we'll try Zercher squats or squats or something like that. So different variations that aren't necessarily the standard barbell back squat, but there's a reason why we're gonna put in a Zercher squat and rather than a conventional deadlift, a sumo deadlift or a trap bar deadlift. What sort of your thoughts on that, or is it just just variation for the sake of variation? If that makes sense.
No, I think that I use. Okay, so this is a great question because what I will do is as follows. Those who love weightlifting tend to make sure they can do the sumo and conventional, and I don't even do that much benching. I got to be honest with you. I got screamed at 30 years ago, maybe even more, when I said, well, as far as the bench, I want to do the movements that keep me off my back and having to push someone off. And that doesn't go over very well. And I'm not saying it's a bad movement. It's just not a priority for me. Now, to your point too, I think there's several factors to look at. Sure, we'll do some conventional deadlifts if they're 5 months from a fight. How's their form? Is it good? Am I going to spend 5 weeks on it? If I have to spend 5 weeks, I'm going to the hex bar, right? Why would I do it? I can get comparable athletic strength that I need probably than I could, from a conventional. And then maybe instead of doing the conventional, I can do the hex and an RDL. And then I have a really good, activation of the muscles that are associated with maybe the regular deadlift. Simultaneously, though, there's other things to take into consideration, right? So like the back squat, do I do it that often? It really depends on a host of things. One of the things is if the fighter's had a lot of shoulder injuries, elbow injuries, and many, as you know, Stephen, in boxing, their hands are shot, right? I mean, I've broken, my thumbs are gone. So I don't back squat anymore. Why? I can't put that excessive pressure on the wrist. So then all of a sudden the Zercher becomes a wonderful alternative. So my point to it is I want the path of least resistance, not with effort, but the path of least resistance on further taxing the joints unnecessarily.
Yeah.
And a back squat barbell is wonderful. It's a wonderful movement. But, how many times these guys have had, I got a lot of fighters, labrum tears, impingement in there. There's problems on the posterior side of the shoulder. They've broken, couple and a carpal, so I'm not going to back squat them. This is just not going to help. It's probably why I don't catch in the clean, for example. Okay. Clean's a wonderful movement, but those who strike, their hands take a beating. Now you can say, hey, I'm being a baby. Oh, that, and people have said that. Yeah, but when you're fighting for 600 grand, if you already got a title, I'm not going to take the chance of taxing your wrist for no reason at all. I can do a high pull and get equal, right? I can get equal benefit in triple extension. I don't have to catch the bar. So those are the ways I tend to think of it. The other thing is, how old is the fighter? If they're 33, well, then they're going to, then they probably had 20 injuries already. So now I got to take the movements that are going to tax those joints less in a negative capacity. So that's really how I view it. If they're young, hey, all right, they got more mobility, flexibility. Maybe we'll do the clean catch. They need the foundational strength. And those are things I'll look at, right? I mean, wrestlers can catch. Well, they're not punching anybody. Their hands do take a beating. They absolutely do. But they don't take the same beating of the kickboxer or the boxer or the MMA athlete. So they can go into the gym, in a D1 gym, and make that catch a little bit more, right? So it's not only just what movement is better or worse, it's what's appropriate at that time. We've got 20 movements available. So let's go down a checklist and go, okay, right now, this fits best.
Yeah, definitely. It's using the right tool at the right time, which I think is a good analogy to use. That there's a whole host of exercises we can use to get people stronger. But like what you say there about the back squat, if it's going to beat up the shoulders, beat up the wrists, it's going to maybe have a negative effect on the performance side of things. And just building from that. So it's interesting you mentioned there about the clean side of things, because do you think from a performance coach side of things that sometimes where coaches go wrong is that they get too much into the nitty gritty of using the powerlifting lifts or the weightlifting lifts to get athletes stronger, whereas actually realizing that it's just getting them stronger using variations of those lifts is just to complement the performance in the ring, as opposed to we're focusing on the numbers of being a better weightlifter, being a better powerlifter in those lifts. That kind of makes sense.
It totally does, and I think it can happen. I don't want to say that a lot of coaches do that. It's not my place to negatively speak on anyone. I think it's something that can be a problem, right? Yeah. Hey, I want to see some progress in strength, but I would rather see, hypothetically, let's say the athlete does 315 pounds in a hex bar, and it's a slow velocity, and I measure my use, if you want to use, right, and certainly we could look at velocity too and measure velocity and stuff like that. So my greater concern before that 315 goes to 365 is, with the same form, did the rate of force development increase, right? Yeah. So now the same 315, if you're going to do like a velocity-based training, it's not perfect, but it's a nice tool. Yeah. Hey, okay? Because, so that's how I would probably take those movements, is I'm not in a rush really to just, see them get stronger and stronger and stronger in a pure weight perspective. I want to see small increases in resistance, improvements in the form. This way we don't, we're not tracking with a deadlift with knee valgus and all this. And I want to see the rate of force development increase. And when that happens, what I'll do is now I'll say to them, okay, you're doing 315 with perfect form and super high speed. Now, during that set, I want you to utilize some motor imagery. And every time you push through the ground, think of throwing a punch, because their form is mastered. They don't have to be cognitive about their form anymore. Well, whatever they want to do, when you fire through the ground and push that ground away from you, you're taking a shot. You're throwing someone. So then I'll do a little bit of that, use some imagery, and tie the movement, once the form is mastered and the weight is mastered, to the fight-specific skill. And then if we like it, hey, all right, we'll go to 335 now. Yeah. But an urgency to bring that weight up and assume that a linear progression and with high percentages in strength automatically translates. I don't make an assumption that anything automatically translates. So I do think some people can assume, oh, wow, their deadlift went up 400 pounds. Unequivocally, that's going to translate. Well, what if they were all, not 400 pounds, they went up to 400. What if they were already strong? Where's the translation? And they're slower than a sundial. Did we do anything to change biomotor qualities in that capacity, right?
Yeah, it goes back to what you say. What you were saying before. If you've got a list of 20 exercises, and what's going to be the right one to work at that. And I kind of wanted to touch that on a little bit because there is definitely benefit of the weightlifting and the power exercises. Definitely, benefit of the standard strength exercises of squat, bench, and deadlift. But I think when it comes to a performance side of things, these guys and women aren't looking to compete in powerlifting. I think sometimes it's to remember what their goal is and what their performance is. Yes, it's good to get stronger, but I think that was a good way of looking at it in terms of were they able to lift that bar with a little bit more of a sort of velocity, with a little bit more force, which gives you a little bit more to work with, which is interesting. That then goes on to when we first started talking at the start of the chat about you look at the schedule and you see when can you fit them in. Does that dictate how you manage the athlete's training volume? Because obviously included in that is their skill sessions and all the other elements to them. And if you're working with an athlete and they end up having a fight in a couple of weeks, which wasn't expected, do you kind of have some plan B's and C's of, right, how can I manipulate volume to change it around? How do you kind of work with that?
Yeah, good. Yeah, no doubt. In American football, most of the coaches today, right? They sit there and they have this big card in front of them, right? And they're like this. Why? Because 3rd and 10, there's plays for every situation, right? Yeah. And they probably have 300 plays, so they, but anyway, in our mind we have to do that. Yeah. And so, a couple of things. If their training volume is really excessive, then what do we do with our own training? Yeah, we might have to cut our volume down and focus on the most essential quality, right? So maybe I've got a fighter, to reiterate, I like to use that example. Great kickboxer, European champ, okay? Pretty good jiu-jitsu, right? But on the ground, maybe, again, mostly mentally. But so if I have a limited amount of time because their training volume is so excessive, then what I'll do is just focus on the qualities that probably are the greatest need. Where can we be of the biggest help? Because if we want to do everything, that may be good, but it may not. We may be limiting the athlete's capacity the next day to rehearse skill because they're a little banged up and they are a little sore, which is never going to be there. So there is an art to it, I think, Stephen. There really is. And generally, I'll use the basic metrics. I'll track with BioStrap, and I'll look at resting heart rate in the morning whenever they'll actually wear the thing. Do a little heart rate variability. It's not perfect, but it gives us a trend, right? Yeah. How's your sleep? Ooh, well, I don't think it measures REM sleep beautifully in all stages beautifully, but it will tell me if they went from 8 hours to 6 hours to 4, right? So I'll use some measurements to take a look at that. And what I will do is I'll cut my volume down if the requisite behaviors are not there.
Yeah.
And then what we'll do is, again, we'll work on, well, what do we need most? Because if, I don't want to train them in the skill set. So on my Instagram, you always see I do a lot of stuff. I'm fascinated with horizontal propulsion, getting people to go from A to B without any air and really explode, which is very common in boxing, right? But my point is, if the individual has outstanding footwork already, then I'm cutting that out. Let's keep the body strong so they can break the sprawl. Let's have that hip extension there. So if somebody shoots on them, they can shove their right hip right up their nose, right? Yeah. Or make that sprawl effective, or mute them in the tie-up. And so that's what it really comes down to, particularly on short notice. Oh my, what do we need? What do we need most? And it may be cardio, by the way, but generally with Ray Longo, he does such a wonderful job, and he's developed a culture where these guys cardiorespiratory condition as a team.
Yeah.
And so I don't need to do much of that. People have said to me, Tony, I don't see you doing cardio. Well, because I might be overdoing it if I do.
Yeah.
You know, because Ray is really running that beautifully. So to your question again, Stephen, I know I kind of wander sometimes, but it will be, yeah, you better watch that schedule. If you have a couple of things, measurement tools, a little resting heart rate in the morning, an HRV, anything, so a sleep watch, okay? So that you know, hey, you know, the trend is not good, then you can adjust your training accordingly. If they're eating like great, sleeping, fluid intake is good, the weight is moving in the right direction, and you watch them in sparring and they look outstanding, okay, good. Then maybe you can play with a few more movements and address a few more qualities. So it really, that's the art of it.
Yeah.
Right? That's the art. Where do I go from here?
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's been like a common theme throughout the chat of, you know, looking what's in front of you, and then you know, moving in dials around and looking where you can help the athlete. It's interesting that you say there when you're talking about conditioning, and you say, you know, people might say to you, you know, right, Tony, why aren't you doing conditioning? Well, they're getting conditioning, another element of it, and on a little bit of a tangent, what are your thoughts on you know, people's train of thought that the strength and conditioning side of things, that needs to be different conditioning as opposed to the, you know, the conditioning that they're going to do in terms of the skill? Do you think sometimes people think that they're two separate things, whereas actually from a performance side of things, you know, if that's already getting taken care of in their skill work, in their sparring, you don't necessarily have to do that in their strength and conditioning side of things, and that's how, you know, a performance and a skill coach is going to work together, rather than, you know, get in a situation where you might be overtraining the athlete.
Great question. And, you know, I have a good friend named Dr. Andy Galpin, and he's a brilliant scientist, one of the best muscle physiologists in the world. And Dr. Andy always says, and nobody likes this, it depends. But my point to that is, I don't think they're separate. Some people, Stephen, they call themselves a strength coach. They want to be a strength coach. I've always wanted to be a performance coach. You know, I was a clinical exercise physiologist too. I have an exercise phys, sports science master's, a nutrition master's, sports psychology and motor development doctorate. And the reason I did that is because I want to, if I don't run everything, I just want to understand it.
Yeah.
So I don't think the performance is separate. I think the performance coach just has to make a decision based upon what they're seeing. Can they do a cardiorespiratory protocol that will augment what the athlete is doing at that time? If they've got, you know, let's say, okay, so, you know, they're doing 2 hard sparring sessions, and then they're running wrestling live for an hour, right? Like, people don't forget this. And then they still got to work their skill and mitts. It's not just about the cardiorespiratory conditioning. It's also about the volume that they can handle. But one thing for sure is, if I do the cardio with them, it's going to be as non-weight bearing as possible, probably the assault bike, maybe even the pool. So while I can work the cardiovascular system, I can rest the joints.
Yeah.
Right? Because the last thing I need to do, unless they're not getting any sparring, if they're not getting any sparring, then I will go into some metabolic conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
Then I will do a circuit that may create the, you know, isometric contractions, moving back and forth, a little bit of the assault bike. If they're getting no sparring, which was the case for some of the guys during COVID, so then we did some. But if their volume, that's why you measure it, is high, I may augment their cardiorespiratory training. And that's why I'm a performance guy. I'm not just strength, but it'll be something, again, that'll work the cardiorespiratory system with the least taxing on the knees, the arms, and the elbows again as possible, because those are already, excuse my language, being beat to hell.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, I think it's looking at you know, what's going to be the best thing, because just beating an athlete all the time is just gonna, you said there from a performance side of things, it's just gonna beat them up. And when we spoke about the psychological side of things, when we spoke about having an exercise in there that they enjoy, if they feel that they're beat up all the time and they're feeling tired, that's going to have a negative mental effect on things, which is important to look at.
Great point, because they'll get in the cage or they'll get in the ring and have a terrible day, and they think they've made no improvement. Yeah. It's just physical. They're overtrained. That's a wonderful point. You want to protect that mindset, because if they get in there and get beat up by a guy in sparring that they normally manhandle, now we got another problem.
Yeah.
Excellent point. We have to keep that into consideration. Have we really helped them? And then what people do, they get mad at them. Oh, well, I have them in good shape. It's all in their head. Well, it is all in their head. Well, that's part of the problem. Regardless, it may be in their head and their body telling their head, I've had enough for a week,
Yeah, definitely. And just touching on that side of things, because obviously we spoke about, managing the volume if an athlete's coming up for a fight, and you have to change it around a little bit. And, you mentioned some of the things that you might be tracking. Is there a point where you actually say, we're not going to have any time in the gym? We're just going to focus on the skill work or anything like that, just so that they're not feeling beat up. Have you had a situation like that, and being able to speak to the athlete about, look, this is the reasons behind what we're doing?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I may just do some light band work. I may stretch them. We may do corrective work, abduction with the band to make sure that, yes, there are times, Stephen, where we do have to say, you know what? No.
Yeah.
Let's just do some band work today and a little bit of mobility work and relax, right? Let's look at some corrective stuff. Maybe they're still mildly protracted from all the punching volume. Let's do a little retraction work today. Let's do some bands, relax and enjoy. Or, if available, one thing I love doing is I'll get them in the pool.
Yeah.
They can have a good time. I'm not going to pressure them. Do a little shadow, do a lap. First of all, getting gravity off you is a wonderful thing to do, right? Yeah. Gravity is kind of like oxygen. You can't live without it, but it really ain't all that good for you. Okay? Because oxygen can oxidize things. It can cause problems in the body. We use it, don't get me wrong. But the same thing with gravity. We can't live without it, but it'll beat you up. So I think you're absolutely right. This is very common in climates in the United States where the weather's always wonderful.
Yeah.
See, our weather sucks 8 months a year, right? So let's say, hey, let's go outside, throw a football around.
Yeah.
People mock that. I'll throw a football around and we'll do some squats in between.
Yeah.
Right? Run a pattern. Let them get their head clear, but keep them mobile. Let them have a good time. So if I had access to wonderful weather year round, I would even use that particular approach more often, where we just say, we're getting out of here today.
Yeah.
Right? Your obligation is to skill first. I'm 9th on the list. And I think strength coaches or performance coaches got to realize that sometimes.
Yeah.
I think we get a little carried away in how much credit sometimes people take in what we do. It's important. And if the fighter credits you, take it.
Yeah.
But when I see a performance coach or nutritionist go, I'm 9-0, I'm like, do you know anything about fighting? Have you been in the gym? Did you see how much they did without you? Okay. Yeah. And how many coaches contributed before you? So my point to that is we help. We are there to make the athlete better. We try to do what's best. We make that decision, get them out of the gym if they're fried. But we also have to realize too, like I said, that, hey, we're there to get them better, not to jump on getting the credit for them getting better. Yeah. We are a behind the scenes person. If the athlete wants to call you out while Joe Rogan's talking to him in a cage and say, Steven is the reason I won this, good. Then take it and post it. But until then, declaring your own record as a performance coach, I see a lot of people doing that. And that's a little bit much for me, man.
Yeah, it's there as it made me laugh when you're saying if you're 9-0, but it's the athlete that goes in there and performs. It's the athlete that's going and deliver. What I laugh is that I used to play a lot more rugby, and it's the coach that puts everything in the background, but ultimately it's the team that goes out. As soon as you cross that line, that's it, it's there. And from a coach's point of view, you're just trying to, exactly like what you said, give them the best tools that they can, prepare them as well as you can. And I think the biggest thing from there, when you're saying about take them into the pool, keep them moving, is just managing the athlete. Because I think sometimes athletes will think that sometimes more is always better, or they need to be doing something, whereas from the outside looking in, it's important to be like, no, we're still moving, we're still doing something, but it's the bigger picture that we need to look out. And I think that from the performance side of things and the strength and conditioning side of things, that's just one element of a bigger picture, which goes into sort of like the next thing I wanted to chat about, is the sort of like nutritional strategies surrounding athletes, because for the amount of training that they're doing, they've got to make sure that they're fueled for that. So I just wanted to talk about what are your thoughts on the best sort of like nutritional practices that you use, and thoughts on the supplement side of things. Obviously, you mentioned at the start about creatine and that sort of stuff. How do you sort of work and implement the nutrition strategies?
Yeah, it's here's how I usually start it, Stephen. Will you do me a favor and try to eat this? Okay. I mean, that's not the way I want to have to start it. Yeah. But okay, but as a grant, as an overview, what do we need to know, right? So the nutrition strategy centers around several things. Obviously, fueling the workout, particularly cognitively, not just the body. We tend to think, you got to get glycogen in the muscle. No, you want to make improvements. You want to make neuromotor improvement here, right? You want to make sensory motor. You want to be able to look at things, process them, and have a brain that has energy that can construct the right pathways so it gets better at it next time. And so you need fuel for that. We think, let's fuel the body. My legs are heavy. No, you're fueling the brain too. Yeah. Because it's cognitively demanding. And you are ripping through like glucose when you're sparring, as an example. Or a coach is teaching you something a little different on the kick and a new punching combo. So I think the first thing is, we obviously talk about the importance. Many athletes are good without eating well, but I don't care who you are, you will be better if you eat well. Yeah. Because the first thing I tell them over and over, other than a little vitamin D and oxygen, you don't breathe in potassium, magnesium, protein, carbohydrates, calcium, electrolytes, sodium, but you don't breathe it in. You ain't getting it from anywhere but your food. And one of the problems is with food is you don't eat one good meal and feel like Superman. I wish you did, because then you maybe would stick with it. Yeah. The positive implications take time. But so philosophically, the way I approach it is here's their body weight. Here's where their body weight has to be. So we do want to get a caloric range. We want to get an estimate. It's not going to be perfect on how much energy they're going to need. And then we break that food down into the best possible carbohydrate, protein, and fat breakdown. What is that? It depends. Do I got somebody at 225 who has to make 185, right? Or do I have Aljamain Sterling who, when he's fat, I mean, completely out of shape, is 7% body fat. That's 7%. But, when he's totally out of shape, he was down to 4.4 for one fight. I measured him, right? So the philosophy is like, okay, let's talk. So you honestly do have to sell the athlete on why this is going to help them. And you don't say, okay, if they're training hard, can I have a little ice cream during camp? Probably, but let's not replace what we need with the ice cream, right? Yeah. So philosophically, how many calories do we need? Here's how much time we got to get there. Here are the foods that are going to get us through that, help us chip down some body fat slowly, and simultaneously provide us with the largest amount of nutrients that we can get. I mean, that's what you hope for. That's how you go into designing it. Do you get everyone to adhere to it all the time? Of course not. But it's the old better to shoot high and miss than aim low and hit. Yeah. The metabolic turnover in a fighter is huge. And the problem, like I said, is improvements in performance come slow. Decrements in performance come slow unless you really don't sleep and don't eat, right?
Yeah.
And you don't notice these things. So you don't notice the negative effects right away, and you don't notice the positive effects right away. But one of the things I try to talk them into is if you're into longevity in your career, then you better eat well.
Yeah.
Because that is the beautiful aggregate effect nutritionally, right? The long-term effects of eating well are potentially going to lengthen your career, keep the joints a little healthier, induce recovery, stop the excessive inflammation in the brain or the joint, right? And actually enable you to perform your skill better, you know? So my philosophic is not complicated. The problem is getting people to do it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like in the United States, I don't care what anyone says, just about everyone knows if they go to McDonald's, the chicken sandwich is better than the Big Mac. It may not be great, but it's better than the Big Mac. The iced tea is better than a chocolate shake. And the apple muffin is not great, but it's better than fries. Everyone knows that, but they don't do it. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that. So we set a really nice guideline for them. We use a little nutrient timing. Hey, let's get this protein, little carbs in after grappling. Let's try to get a little of this in before your kickboxing session. So we set a little framework, right? Do they follow it perfectly all the time? No. But one thing I'd say to them, if you're losing weight really fast, let's make an adjustment. We're not losing weight at all. Let's make an adjustment. And the important thing is to measure body fat throughout the camp so you know if there is a trend in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely, and it's interesting to say there about eating well. Is going to be more beneficial over the long term. I know for me, especially when I was at university training quite a lot, you think, oh well, I've trained quite a lot, so I can just eat anything because I know I'm going to be back up training the next day. But actually, I know from my own experience, you end up feeling worse in terms of recovery when you have an off day, when you've just been eating whatever you want, as opposed to right, actually, I've had this conversation with a couple of other coaches that I work with. Is you wouldn't put really bad petrol or diesel into a really good car. You want to make sure that you're putting in the best. Make sure that you're putting in the best oil and looking after it. And as soon as you were saying that was just going through my head that these are finely tuned athletes and engines, and we want to make sure that the fueling properly, especially when we talk about longevity and recovery and all that sort of stuff. That kind of make you touch on, what are your thoughts on the supplement side of things? Is there supplements that you use a lot of, or some supplements that you think that a lot of people maybe use, but actually, aren't that beneficial?
Yeah, I think that here's the other thing too. So we have to think of it, Stephen, in this if we, they're real busy, so they don't have time to take 10 different things, and they're not going to, right?
Yeah.
So what is our top 5? So that's what I try to do. And I think everyone knows now, regarding creatine, it's not just about power and strength anymore. The therapeutic applications are so broad. The research now on creatine is in the neuroprotective effects. It's in mitigating TBI. It's a fuel, by the way, for T cells in your immune system. I mean, so it's fascinating. So creatine is there. You don't have to mega dose, but I try to have my athletes take small chronic dosing so that it's always in the body. It could be 4 grams, 5 grams, but keep it there. Yes, it augments performance, but the neuroprotective effects, right? The hydration, pulling water into the muscle, potentially being a fuel and having positive effects on the brain, helping maybe taking apart an immunoprotection, which, as could be a big factor if you're overtraining and undersleeping. Yeah. So it is number one. And for 30 years, I don't make anything on creatine. I don't, for 35 years, people have been trying to prove it harmful and failed. So I think it's number one. Number two, it's always nice to have a protein powder around because they're in transit a lot, right? Yeah. Sometimes they're going to go to jiu-jitsu at this gym. They'll go to boxing, or maybe they'll go work at another gym, get away for a little boxing. So have that protein because you need the protein. You're not recovering without it. the presence of protein will elicit, that a muscle protein synthesis response. So a whey protein is always great because they can have a protein shake with a banana, whatever, some applesauce, keep it with them if they need a quick protein carb meal in between. So that's number 2. Number 3, beta alanine, hands down. I'm still an advocate of it. Until the research proves otherwise, then I'll walk away from it. But beta alanine is a good muscle buffer. We know that, right? Within the muscle. So sports such as boxing, MMA, collegiate wrestling, where the anaerobic production is very high, and you're really the lactate threshold, well, maybe not as much, but certainly in wrestling is often really the lactate buildup is high and the localized muscle fatigue is high. Beta alanine can be really wonderful, a good supplement, and it's something that has to be applied chronically. But what would beta alanine do? It gives you the last 15 punches with crispness that maybe you didn't have if you didn't take it in that, and you win the round, right? Up here in New York, I love vitamin D. Yeah. And we see the importance of immunoprotection and a lot of positive research on mitigating the effects of COVID, right, with vitamin D. Now, if you live in Florida or California, you're in the sun 7 days a week. But when you're up where we are and you're far from the equatorial latitude, particularly if you're African American or Latin American or of African descent, where you have the darker skin in the northern latitudes, you need the vitamin D because you don't get good sun penetration, right? Yeah. So that's really important, particularly for the athletes to know. So I put the D in, and I'm a proponent if there's no issues with bleeding, but or any damage in the brain. I really do like omega-3 supplementation.
Yeah.
It's highly beneficial and neuroprotective too.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of, touch on there because I think it, sort of comes full circle when we've spoken about the exercise side of things and the training side of things in terms of coming around with nutrition, in terms of it is gonna be tough to especially in the early stages, to try and address food, but also with the supplements, just as it is with the exercises, there's a reason behind why we're having them, and it's still or taking them still with the idea of, right, how is this going to influence the athlete and allow them to perform on the day. So quite a lot of topics and tangents covered there, but the last question that I like to ask is, from everything that we've chatted about there, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom for everyone listening?
Okay, it's hard. I would. So words of wisdom from a performance coach perspective. Incessantly study, right? Keep it broad. And what I mean by that is study it all. You don't have to do it all, but know what's going on. Have a really diverse knowledge because a good performance coach wants to run physiology, right? And you run physiology, Stephen, through having at least an overview of nutrition, an overview a little bit about sports psychology, an overview of exercise physiology and strength and conditioning. So I would say this, really, diversify, continue to diversify, and everyone does now, your knowledge in the sports sciences, nutrition sciences, and maybe even sports psychology sciences. Immerse yourself in the discipline that you want to be a performance coach in. Yeah. Immerse mean do your own training, hit some mitts, great. Do your jits, do a little wrestling, watch the sparring, learn from skill coaches. I ask Ray Longo questions all the time. Where does this punch belong? Why would you do that, right? Ray, does this drill work, you think? Here's what I'm trying to do. So immerse yourself in the sport, because you're not just coaching. You want to know the language. You want to know the nomenclature. You want to know, the culture, because then you can better relate to that athlete. So that's really what it is. Learn as much as you can. Assume you know nothing. Diversify your knowledge. Immerse yourself in the sport, and give people the best honest product you can. You're going to fail. We all do. right? If you want it, I said this to performance coaches, if you want to pat yourself on the back when they win, you better look and go, well, what did I do that maybe contributed to the loss?
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to say, did I fall short? Right? Oh, my fighter won on conditioning. Well, they lost in a decision and their conditioning was good. Maybe if their conditioning was a little bit better, they would have got the decision. You can always say that to yourself, right?
Yeah.
So be humble and always strive to say, no matter what the fight was, what can I do better?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good way to finish on, because there's always room for improvement. There's always new things to learn, especially like what you said there. One of the phrases that I quite like is, if you're the smartest person in the room, go and find another room and try and learn a little bit more. Thanks a lot, Tony, for taking the time to jump on the podcast. Really enjoyed sort of picking your brains and chatting about all things training and performance. For anyone who might have any questions about what we've chatted about today, or see the content that you put out there, where can people find you or reach out to you?
Yeah, first, Stephen, I give the thanks to you. Nothing makes me happier than seeing really great young coaches like yourself. That's what makes me very happy, to see how far our industry is going. It really makes me smile. I'm a university professor, so and so watching people excel is really great. I'm not a huge social guy. I probably, should push myself more, but Instagram, I'm on Fight Shape is the name of my company, FIGHT SHAPE _ Ricci, my last name. Very easy to find, Fight Shape. Emails, just Tony@fightshape.net if anybody wants to contact me. And I'm on Facebook, and I don't talk politics. I only talk training.
Oh, good. Definitely everyone have a look at that then. It'll be a little bit better than the politics side of things. So thanks again, Tony, for taking the time to jump on. Really appreciate it. And thanks for everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.